for the first time in just over a decade, the Dakar Rally had an Irish participant. That was motorcyclist Oran O'Kelly, who tackled the 9,000 kilometer 2 week course at the start of the year in Saudi Arabia, all the way to the finish line on the 19th of January. And delighted to say that Oran is joining me today, fresh from the prestigious event. And Oran, thanks for coming on. I did say fresh, but you've tackled a 9,000 kilometer course, and then you have to fly back here, and also with all the excitement, the homecomings, and everything else. How are you? I suppose mentally and physically after all of that.
Yeah, Raf, thanks very much for having me on. Really, really appreciate the opportunity. I'm still on cloud nine. I'm still buzzing from finishing on Friday the 19th afternoon. Getting back here, having such a warm welcome of the Irish public and all the support I've received before the event, through the event, and even now more so since post the event. I'm still very excited and buzzing. It's for me a huge childhood dream and accomplishment to get to the finish, to do our country proud and to make all our sponsors very proud. I'm delighted to be here and to be able to share with you some
Yeah.
of the stories and some of the hardships.
Yeah, and like you had a bit of an experience of going there like in 2023, but it was a different capacity. So you were a volunteer when you first went over in 2023, wasn't it?
Yeah, so just as part of my preparation, I've been really planning and preparing to do this event for the last 4 years, quite dedicated in numerous aspects. But last year, the opportunity arose to volunteer to go and drive a camper van and clean toilets for the Audi team, which is one of the top car teams. So I jumped at that just to get a on the ground first-hand experience as to what was going on with the teams, how to best prepare and everything else. And it was actually quite magical this year. I crossed the finish line side by side with Carlos Sainz Sr., who won Dakar in the car. And last year I was helping supporting his team. So a huge leap forward in the last year, from supporting that team to competing with them and crossing the finish line with them was something magical.
Yeah, and maybe if you want to just give us a sense of, I suppose, your own background as well, because you've been on a motorbike since you were a very young age in terms of motocross. But you were born in Dubai, am I right? And then, but both your parents are Irish, but straight away, and I think from what I've heard as well, your dad also had a huge interest in bikes and stuff as well. So it seems like it was a natural transition for you on that.
Exactly, yeah. So growing up in the Middle East to two Irish parents, and then we returned home when I was about 11 or 12 years old. But I grew up with four brothers, all racing motorcycles, so very competitive environment. And our dad was, and it still is, always our hero. And he was big into rally racing. Unfortunately, never got to a Dakar, but definitely that's where it inspired us. Had a huge break off the bike then from about 12 years old till about 26, 27, when I decided there was a bit of unfinished business in this motorcycle racing, and was living in Ireland at the time. I managed to sell a small business I had, and then that all went all in to this passion, to this dream, to try and get back into rally racing, and
Yeah.
ultimately to try and represent Ireland back at Dakar again. But it all came together magically. Had an enormous support, particularly from my main sponsor, O'Driscoll's Irish Whiskey. Michael Stafford got behind this dream almost a year ago, when it was all just a big idea and a wild idea of massive unknowns to me and to any Irish commercial sponsor. But he really backed me and got behind me and this big idea. And I think I've done him proud and delivered on what I set out to do. And it's been an incredible journey. I don't think I would have been half as well prepared without the help that I've gotten from him and from other businesses, and from an enormous amount of people. So many different Irish people. Some people not even interested in motorcycling or motorsport have gotten behind me and been enormously supportive when they've realised, I think, the magnitude of this task that I went about completing.
Yeah, because you've compared it, I suppose, the dream of trying to do and trying to get to the start line in Dakar as like wanting to be an astronaut that wants to go to the moon. It's it really is quite a stark thing because some people might assume just getting to the start line might be the easier part, but even doing that part is difficult.
Yeah, and incredibly tough just to qualify for the event alone. I've had to do several other of the World Championship rounds. So Dakar itself is one of five World Championship events. It's a bit like the Monaco of Formula One, if you will. It's the big, prestigious one. It's the one everybody wants to win. It's where all the history and media attention and focus is. So to be able to complete that now is round one. Following on, then there's a couple of other rounds that I'll see if I have any appetite to get stuck into.
Yeah, and the team that you were involved with, and this is as far back as 2020, as you said, you took a long break from the bike, and then till you were about 27 or so, and then you get involved with Vendetta Racing UAE, and this is I suppose the starting point in terms of building you up to get to Dakar for 2024.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So I got taken under the wing by them and competed at Dakar 24 with my two teammates, Dave Mabs and Dave McBride, and massively standing on their shoulders, being able to participate and being able to race at the events. They've both done two Dakars each themselves before. So enormous knowledge or wealths of knowledge that they've shared with me that allowed me then to put myself in the best position possible to make a successful run at it this year.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, you sold your business back home, which was sort of in the motor industry in a sort of roundabout way, and then the sponsorship, you have to raise funds. The other thing, did you get much advice from any of the Irish who had been there in years past? I know it was, I think, over a decade since the most previous one, or just over a decade, but did you consult anyone else in terms of, like, say, Irish people who've done it?
Yeah, 100%. For me, that's a rite of passage. To tip the hat to all the lads that went before. In my opinion, a much wilder time and event. It was a lot more foreign and a lot more unknowns around then. So I've met every single one of them. And leading up to the event, we hosted an event that was aimed at trying to raise awareness and some funds with Charlie Borman back in September. And I wanted to use that specifically event to celebrate all of them as well. I think a lot of those Irish lads went before. Many of them completed Dakars and came back to Ireland. So I think it was really important to celebrate the Irish history at Dakar. And now I can confidently say the Irish future at Dakar as well.
Yeah.
So that tied really nicely together. And they've all been enormously supportive in many different ways. Just even the little tips and just nods of confidence they gave me throughout, before the event and through the event as well. Has been really rewarding, knowing that I think my name is going to be etched now in history under those gents that went before.
Yeah, and obviously 2024 it was staged in Saudi Arabia, as a lot of the recent events have been. And once you get to the start line, and as you said, you've done some of those other championships that sort of build up to it, but after the first stage, is there a little bit of a shock to the system? Or how is it more grueling than some of the ones, like the preparation ones you've done before?
Yeah, it's on a completely different level. It honestly made some of the other races and even some of the World Championship rounds look like child's play. The first day absolutely knocked me on my rear. I struggled hugely technically with it and mentally with it as well, and really had to pick up the pieces and my confidence and put it all back together. For 2 hours during the first stage, I was in complete shock. I spent it completely on my own on a passage, a 50-kilometer passage that I was 100% sure I was lost. And then when I got to the end of it, my GPS beeped and confirmed that I was in the right direction and in the right going. I nearly felt a small sense of shame coming back to the bivouac with just how underprepared I felt. And when I got back to the bivouac, strangely enough, I found massive comfort and camaraderie in how everybody else felt. I could see by the look on people's faces how much everyone had struggled. And I'm not talking about amateur first time weekend warriors like myself. Some of the top pros and professionals, like guys finishing in top five, were absolutely shook. But that is Dakar, and that's what it's designed to do. It's designed to be the ultimate test of an off-road motorsport event, to put people through its paces, to really question people whether they believe they belong there or not. And I think that's what the whole thing has been about, is about finding the confidence, looking at different elements of emotional regulation, finding your focus, and just setting small, tiny, achievable goals throughout the day. Spending that first day thinking about 14 days of racing would just overwhelm anyone.
Yeah,
So
and
being able to break it down in small sections really makes it possible just to push through anything.
Yeah, and I guess there's an element of also managing your pace, like with the heat, with the the long day, the long I suppose the long stages that you're on as well, and I suppose the knowledge of I suppose the mechanics and technicality of your bike, of course, as well would be a huge part of it.
Yes, so there's a huge amount of preservation and planning, and really keeping your ego in check as well. The bike, as much as yourself, is really important to know and understand. Okay, now is the time when to push on, and now is the time when to back off, to pump the brakes a little bit. And I'm very lucky to be in a position where, as a career passion of mine, I'm almost a qualified sports and performance psychologist. So I used a huge amount of that during the rally itself, but in preparation for it as well, to really be able to prepare my mind for some of the challenges that were ahead and some of the attention and focus that was needed. About a third of rally racing is navigation. So you can have the best bike or equipment in the world, you can be the fittest and fastest rider in the world, but if you can't navigate correctly, which uses enormous amount of attention and enormous amount of focus, you'll very quickly end up lost. So being able to train those elements really helped me, put me in a position where I could ride at a nice, consistent pace and not burn out and not get lost and not play the mind games that go on through some of these challenging endurance events. Just to give you a bit of perspective, the event itself is very similar to doing like an Ironman, 14 days with a day break in the middle. So just being able to train and prepare for that from a nutrition and from a hydration standpoint was incredibly challenging. I've lost almost 7.5 kilos from being at the event itself.
Oh, wow.
I think I've earned the right to enjoy myself to a little bit of excess in food. Hopefully over the next week, trying to put some weight back on.
Yeah, no, have a good fry. Make sure at least at the basic level have that or a bit of cake or something. But you mentioned you made a comparison to sort of other events like Ironman. I was kind of thinking along the lines of I was watching a Tour de France thing on Netflix there, sort of like a series. It seems to me it's almost like that in the sense you have a lot of stages. It's very grueling. It's covering an entire country, different gradients, different landscapes, or sort of like a Tour de France with motorized vehicles essentially, but also with sort of that campsite thing in between. You mentioned the bivouac, like at the end of each stage. So what are the campsites like as you try and wind down from each day and sort of try and build yourself up for the next stage?
Yeah, so that's a fantastic comparison, Ralph. It's actually owned and operated by the same company as the Tour de France. So there's definitely enormous amount of synergies. Amri Sports Organization runs both events, but the camps are very basic. It's literally like being at a festival here during the summer, except you all you have access to is toilets and showers, which even at the best of times can be some of the challenging parts today, getting to use them. I don't think I had too many cold or warm showers throughout the whole thing. So you're coming back in from a day, and we did it as a team. So you have a team truck and trailer that sets up basically a mobile workshop. But for 3 weeks, we're all sleeping in very basic tents, which is the real spirit of the event. It's about adventure and more of an expedition than your standard racing. And almost most of the teams are sleeping in very similar conditions, where you're sleeping in absolute bare basics. You're given some food to go in the morning and hot food that's available in the evenings. But it's the real spirit of the classic Dakar, and the adventure is you're really surviving off bare basics when you're racing across a complete continent. Like the 9,000 kilometers itself can be compared as the crow flies from Dublin to Cape Town in South Africa. So just
Oh,
imagine the distances that we're racing and that we're covering. Incredibly challenging, but with that also incredibly rewarding. Now that I can say that we've got to the finish line.
yeah, and but there's obviously the kind of the physical risk and also a mortal risk to it as well, because during the event there was the Spanish rider Carlos Falcon who died. He had been in a coma for a week after a fall on the second stage. For you taking part, when did you hear about I suppose his initial accident? And as a fellow participant, does it put a little bit of doubt in your mind, or is it? And having spoken to a lot of people involved in motorsport, generally the moment you acknowledge that fear is probably the time you have to stop. So how do you process that?
Yeah, and unfortunately, we lost a very good competitor at the event this year. We all found out about it immediately after. It was the second stage, so it was still at the very beginning of the race. A very emotional time for a lot of us to know that the competitor was gone. I think a lot of us knew a lot sooner than the organization and then media found out about it. But unfortunately, that's part of the package with racing at this event and this level, is that risk is always there. Fortunately for us as competitors and on behalf of the organization, there's been enormous leaps and steps forward in the last 5 years that I've been aware of the event in terms of safety. A helicopter will be with you if you press a button after 5 minutes. The safety equipment itself has been incredible leaps and steps forward, and we have a full airbag device that goes off when you come off the bike. Although, of course, all these things are never 100%, but the organization itself and as a whole has taken huge leaps forward, to the point where it's probably similar to being in or driving in any standardized vehicle today. There's always going to be that little bit of risk, but us as competitors have to deal with that challenge, have to deal with these situations when they happen during competition. But for me personally, I always just like to try and focus on what's within your control and what's without, or what's outside of your control, and just being able to focus on exactly how I can be most focused and paid attention on the bike every single day, and put me in the best position to be competitive, but more importantly than that, to be in a safe position to bring it home every day and ultimately bring that medal home to Ireland at the end of the event.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, hugely grueling, and as you said, that first stage, it was a real tester over the 2 weeks. What was the moment that sort of pushed you closest to the brink, in terms of maybe almost where you have that temptation of maybe giving up, but you find a way to get over it?
Yeah, I think if you speak to a lot of competitors, they'll say, I never once considered giving up. But almost every day there was something designed in the course to really make you question, do I really want to be here? Do I not want to? Well, what am I doing? What have I signed up for? But just really relaying back on my personal intrinsic motivations as to why I set out to do this event almost 4 years ago, and what I was really looking for, to prove something to myself, and to really just achieve something for myself. I think if you really get caught up in the attention or social media side of it, or looking for this trophy or looking for that, or looking to tell someone else about it, that will break you. I know that from sports and performance psychology, that you really have to have really strong intrinsic values, doing it for people you love or care about. And that's what really picks you back up when you're at rock bottom on those days, to build yourself back up, just to go, okay, let's push forward for another hour. Let's push forward for another 30 minutes. Just being able to break it down into those small micro steps. And I think if you ask anyone that's done something maybe a little above and beyond the normal day-to-day life challenge, it's all about breaking it into small little consumable parts, pushing through it. Even now, thinking about a 2-week Dakar as a whole, as a beast of itself, is enormously intimidating. But if you break it down into small little consumable parts, I think everyone will be able to surprise themselves what human nature and human psyche is available or is possible to achieve.
Yeah, and I brought up your quote earlier in terms of that, the astronaut trying to go to the moon, and that's sort of the big challenge. But actually, even the event itself, when you're looking overhead at some of the, some great photos and great shots of the event as participants are going through, I kind of looked at it like, as some parts of it, anyways, particularly the sand dunes. There's almost like a Martian feel to it. I don't know if you can appreciate it because you're in the middle of the event and you're trying to just make your way forward, but are there moments you kind of pull back and it feels so otherworldly in terms of the landscape around you?
In enormous, there must have been at least 10 times when I was riding the bike and I just lost a little bit of attention, lost a bit of focus, and I was looking at the view and the scenery and thinking, this is absolutely incredible. But within 2 seconds, then the front wheel would bounce off the front rock and the whole bike would move sideways, and you'd have to react very quickly to it. So you were reminded of how to be focusing on the task on hand. But we passed incredible scenery in the Saudi Arabia Gulf. Some volcanoes we passed that looked like they were actually moving by the sand and the wind. Some incredibly scenery, particularly in areas like Alula. It just looked like something out of a Star Wars film. It genuinely didn't look like planet Earth. So really, really lucky and fortunate experience a lot of that, and hopefully there might be one day soon when I can go back and hopefully do it at a little bit of a slower pace. Going through some of those areas at 160 kilometers an hour is not the easiest way to see them, but definitely some beautiful landscapes and scenery. And I think that's why Saudi Arabia hosted, is they've just got such a vast spread. Like we went to some areas that were 40 plus degrees, and some mornings would be starting off on the road sections on the bikes, and it would be -2, -3. And we're weather ranging all the way. So the environment and the climates that they put us to as well is all part of the challenge, just to really test us at both ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, I think you kind of half answered my my final question as well. So you finished 57th in the bike category, and to get to the finish line is probably the biggest achievement, first of all, regardless of where you end up. But that final question was actually, are you planning to tackle it again maybe next year or anytime soon? And I think you've kind of half answered that.
Yeah, I have an enormous amount of work to do. And to be honest with you, I thought I was quite well prepared and had done as much research and experience as I could. But definitely caught in a few areas where I definitely could have been better prepared. So there's been a lot of notes taken on board now. I'm just going to decompress, I think, for the next week, and then start building and thinking what could be possible. But for sure, there's unfinished business. I definitely went this year with the full focus on completion. I'd love, there was another opportunity to go back to focus on being a bit more competitive. And now I have one under my belt. And I think I have a very good feel of what the expectations are throughout the 14 days to really go at it with better prepared and better in a better position to go after a couple more positions.
Well, we'll be keeping an eye on that, and we fully expect you to tackle Dakar again many more times. But that was fascinating. A lot of, I suppose, colorful scenery and things as you kind of outlaid there. So, Oran, congratulations on finishing Dakar and sort of doing that dream of being the sort of astronaut who does get to the moon in a sort of sense. Even though, as we said, it's Martian looking landscapes at the end of it. But Oran, look, thanks very much for your time, and best of luck at the future.
Thank you. Yeah, and we've got a round 2 of the World Championship in about 6 weeks at the end of February. So watch this space. That builds on the points I achieved and won from Dakar. And that's in Abu Dhabi at the end of February, beginning of March, and finished 15th at that overall last year. So hopefully going to go back there with a good bit of experience and knowledge under my belt, and do Ireland proud at that event as well.
All right, very good stuff. Thanks very much.